It's my 38th birthday today, and I thought it's a good moment to share the 7 key lessons I've learned from 32 years in chess, from studying great players, becoming a Grandmaster, and coaching thousands of students. Here is the first position. White has just moved the knight to e4, putting pressure down here, and what do you do as black? Well, the easiest solution is just to trade off knights. And then white recaptures, hitting the pawn in the middle. Now, again, there is a pretty obvious move that black can play, putting the bishop right here to defend the pawn, it all makes sense. And then white goes pawn to b4, suddenly the knight is trapped, and black is going down, black is in a lost position. It seems like just an unlucky course of events, but of course, not really. Which brings us to the first rule: to take is a mistake. And of course, if you've been following this channel for some time, then you're probably aware of this rule already, but nevertheless, it's just so simple and so common. You can follow this rule in probably every game that you play, or at least every other game that you play. Here's the issue: avoid unmotivated exchanges. They usually help your opponent to move his pieces forward, and in doing so, improve his position. So notice that we help white to centralize and advance his queen, and you do that by your own move. You're helping your opponent. From here, the queen hits this pawn, and only because the queen was standing here, it was possible for white to even push that pawn forward, because otherwise your bishop would simply grab the pawn without the queen standing on this active position. Without the queen being there, your knight would be able to escape to this square on c4, but because the queen is so active, the square is now out of reach. What do you do instead? Well, keep up the pressure. Avoid unmotivated exchanges when that exchange does not give you anything. Instead, just defend your knight while developing your bishop, and now you insist on the exchange being on your terms. Now, if white wants to take here, sure, go ahead. That will help me to advance and activate my bishop, which is good. We're moving on to the next rule. It is black to play here. White has just moved the bishop to g5, pinning the knight, and also indirectly reinforcing the threat to this pawn on d5. In such positions, most players automatically defend. They play something like bishop e6 to guard this pawn in the middle of the board. And while it is an okay move to play, or maybe some people would castle noticing that their king is centralized, there is another way of thinking, which is the one used by stronger players. They know that you win game by attacking, by putting pressure on your opponent, and those attacking moves are the strongest. Even while being attacked, it is usually better to first of all check those counter-attacking opportunities, because they are typically the strongest. In a nutshell, offense is the best defense. And here, if you ask yourself, how do I go forward and create threats, you'll come to realize that there is a move pawn to d4 hitting this knight. Now you're actually hitting two birds with one pawn. You're gaining more space, you're gaining more central control, but also you're kicking this knight out. Therefore, you're improving your position and simultaneously make it harder for your opponent, which is the ideal chess move. But of course, white can say, I'm not going to back down, I'm going to go forward. Now he's trying to make use of this pin, and he attacks you once again. What do you do then? It's the same thing. When they attack them back. You ask yourself, how do I go forward and create threats? Preferably to white's side of the board. And there is a move bishop b4 check, which is a great move to play, but on top of that, there is a fantastic solution. You ignore this pin, and you just grab this knight on e4, letting them capture your queen, because then bishop b4 is even stronger. And now as white has to cover the king from this check with a knight, then you take it, continuing to attack this king, and now white has to give the queen back, and as a result of this line, black is up a clear knight in an endgame. The next rule is helpful when you're not sure which move to play, which unfortunately happens more often than we'd wish to admit. And it occurs in situations when you seemingly did everything right. You've grabbed your coffee, you've patted your dog, you teased your little sister, but nevertheless now it's time to make a decision. How do you do it? I call it a victory lap, and this is also my game, so I can tell you exactly how I was thinking to find those moves. Now, you look at every piece that you have, and then you decide which one is doing nothing, which is the principle of the least active piece. Now, for example, right here we've got the queen, which is very active, putting pressure on the king side. The bishop is also controlling a bunch of squares. This other bishop is definitely very good along this diagonal, but we also have these two rooks, which are so far doing nothing, which gives you a clear idea that you need to move the rook or find a way to make the rook active. And that is such a universal rule, which is applicable to almost any position that you play. And here, like, what could you do with this rook? Like, you could potentially move the pawn forward, which would be nice, would activate the rook and maybe even hit the queen, but right now you can't do that because the bishop is pinning this pawn down to the king. And therefore I decided to get the king out of the way. I played g3 with an idea to move the king out of the way of the bishop, and then finally to break open the position with pawn to f4. Black responded with h6, attacking the bishop retreats, king to h7, just to solidify everything, king to g2, and now white is ready to attack. Black played knight f8, also I guess just to keep everything protected, and then f4. Hit in the center, but more importantly, just opening this file for the rook. And you can see how quickly things are turning in white's favor. Black offered an exchange of queens, I retreated back because I wanted to attack. And now you can see that as soon as the rook enters the stage, it is basically over. Black played another move in the game, but lost anyway. But you can see how strong the position becomes very, very quickly. We can bring the other rook into play. This rook can be shifted to the king side. And if black tries whatever, you just keep attacking. The queen has actually only one square to go to. The other rook comes into play. And as soon as we activate every single piece that we have, our attack just becomes monstrous. The queen has to go, and now white would win the game. Let me take this moment to thank you guys for your birthday wishes. That is very touching and it means a lot. Thank you. I also thought to make something special for you, and therefore for the next few days there will be a massive discount up to 70% off on my premium courses, including the super pack, which is every course I've ever made at an even greater discount, and that gives you that structured path forward to get your chess to the next level and to sacrifice your opponent's rating. Next, I want to show you how to analyze your games to actually get better in chess. But first off, let's see at this example. Let's say you're playing this game, all right? I just took a game of two players rated approximately 1000, and here's the game. The rook goes to the open file, black attacks, white defends, and then like goes f5, rook to b1, and white eventually won the game because the king is defenseless, white is just infiltrating. All right, now what do you think about this game? So far, it seemed normal, usual game, all right? White played well and won the game, right? Now I'm using a chess engine to analyze these moves, and you can use Chess.com, Lichess, or any chess engine that you have. And here it says that knight a3 is actually an inaccuracy, and instead it suggests to move the knight to d2. Interesting. What's the difference? The next stage for you is to draw that takeaway, to draw that conclusion that you can carry on to your next games. In this case, I would say that the conclusion is you should aim to move your pieces towards the center. Why is that so? Well, from a3 you hit the pawn on c4, and that is nice. However, if white were to develop the knight right here, it would also hit the pawn, but in addition to that, it would have other options, like to go to e4, hitting the queen, maybe this square, maybe d6 and attack the king, maybe to f3 just to solidify the king side, and you still attack this pawn on c4. That's the beauty of centralizing your pieces. They have greater quantity of options. Alright, so now we know that it is better if there is a choice to move pieces towards the center. Now let's continue. We go knight e3, black goes knight g4, hitting the rook, rook to b2, oops, and it shows that it is actually a blunder. While initially we thought that putting the rook to an open file might be a good idea, but now it shows you that it is a blunder, a losing move. How come? Well, actually, black could play queen to e3, checking the king, and then knight to f2 with this fork, and black is just winning. Therefore, instead of thinking that white played a nice game and logically won, we see that, yeah, white actually just avoided this blunder because they were lucky. I noticed that it's especially useful to analyze your game with a computer when you notice that you're going on tilt. You're blundering, you keep losing the game, keep losing the rating, and you just keep playing, but things get worse and worse. It's very good at this moment to stop, take a breath, analyze one of your games with an engine, and then it helps you just get yourself back on track and stop losing, stop blundering. But again, it's very important to draw those general conclusions that you can carry on to your next games, because otherwise, what's the useful thing of doing all that thing? So here I would say that the useful thing is that noticing what I call anti-blunder check. Noticing that whenever your opponent can move forward to your side of the board and make a threat, it can be deadly and you can just lose the game on the spot. And therefore, to avoid that, you got to be on the lookout of those options. You got to ask yourself, can my opponent come forward and create a threat? And you got to check those opportunities. If you do that, you will avoid mistakes. Which brings us exactly to the next rule, which I call that anti-blunder check. Look at this example. It was black to play. Black noticed that the white queen attacks the rook. And how do you defend it? They decided to castle queenside, which seemed to make a lot of sense. You want to castle anyway, but there is one major drawback. It blunders checkmate in one. And while that seemed like a sudden misfortune, but in reality, it certainly isn't. Now, how do you avoid things like that? You need to ask yourself, which moves forward, which aggressive moves forward can my opponent play? And if you get used to that way of thinking, focusing on your side of the board and asking yourself which forward aggressive moves can my opponent play, you will literally eliminate all the blunders. Because here, besides queen to a8 check, white actually also could have captured this pawn with a queen, or even with a knight, which would also fork both rooks. So black's castling was, like, ironically, actually a triple blunder, right? Blunder of this, and blunder of this. Like, bingo, it's a triple blunder in one move. On top of that, there is one more rule which allows you to secure your position, and that is really easy to follow. In this case, it is white to move, and what we can see here is that the king is exposed, black can potentially deliver some checks, but also black is putting pressure to this pawn on e4 in the middle of the board. And after some thinking, white may realize that, okay, I can actually play f3, guard this pawn, control this square, and I'm doing good. Maybe I can play queen f2 and trade queens after that, stuff like that. But when you play a move like that, your opponent will keep attacking. Black can play something like this with a bunch of threats, with a queen check or a knight check, maybe can use the rook lift, and now it's getting really dangerous for white, and it's very easy to, not find the right defensive move and to go down. Here's the rule: neutralize opponent's pieces on your side of the board. Don't wait till it gets dangerous. Do that right away. Here we can see this queen on your side of the board, and it is your primary task to get rid of it. How can you do that? You can attack it and try to push it away. If black insists, you attack it again, or you can offer an exchange. And if your opponent accepts that, fine, there will be no piece on your side of the board, or if the piece finally comes back, now there is no opponent's piece on your side of the board, and it is time for you to begin planning your own attack. Now ask yourself, how can I go forward and make threats? And that's how you can find this little nice combo, and now it's your turn to have fun. The next thing is slow and fast thinking. And it's a very interesting thing, because I can tell you that whenever I deal with a new student, 9 times out of 10, they're making it run and they're unaware of it completely, because somehow no one ever talks about that, while it's so important, especially for blitz. Here's the thing. Here I'm showing you also the clock, so you can see the time that both players spent on a move. And in this position, for instance, we can see that here it was white to play, and notice the time. Now white developed the bishop and spent approximately 50 seconds on that move. Now, why did that happen? Well, I guess white was calculating something like knight to c6 and went into those calculations. I get it. But nevertheless, here's the rule. In the early stage of the game, when you just develop pieces, try not to overthink it. Just develop pieces, castle, and do it quickly. Do not even begin to think about those advanced various opportunities that you could potentially pursue. Usually, it makes no sense. You gotta be quick, and you gotta just play normal moves. Here's another game and another example. In this case, it was black to play, and black captured on g4, white recaptured. And as we can see, based on the time, white recaptured instantly. Here's the rule. When there is tactics in the position, think. Think when it's hot. Kind of there's saying strike when it's hot, but here, think when it's hot. Why is that so? When pieces are attacking each other, when your opponent's king is vulnerable, it makes sense to think a little bit, because maybe you can win the game on the spot. And here white recaptured automatically, just thinking that they need to guard the knight, but instead they could have captured with a rook, threatening this checkmate, and black is immediately in trouble. Now, okay, let's get back to the game. White recaptured, black played rook to f8, white played h4, black went rook to f7, and pawn takes g5, again almost instantly, while instead white could have captured with a queen with a checkmate. So again, think when it's hot, when there is tactics in the position, take some time to think. That's it for today. Let me know if you have any questions, and have a great rest of the day.